Hey, if you spent a lot of time online looking at IELTS advice, you probably know that there's a lot of mixed advice and a lot of bad advice out there. So in this series of videos, we're going to be taking a look at some common IELTS myths, which are things people often say, and sometimes teachers online often say, that aren't actually true. So I spent the weekend watching lots of IELTS videos and looking for things that weren't actually good advice that people often believe. Before we get started, if this is your first time on the channel, this is Practical English. We share lots of videos every single week about IELTS, about speaking, and about listening. So if that sounds interesting to you, do hit like and hit subscribe down below. So the first thing to say here is that learning vocabulary is an important part of language, but learning certain words won't necessarily get you a certain score. And that's because how the IELTS is kind of set up and also because how it's graded. Now, the way that IELTS is set up, you don't know what questions you're going to get before you go into the exam. So if you find a list of words on YouTube that say, oh yes, you can get a band 9 by learning these words, that's all well and good if you're writing an essay where those words are actually useful. But if you've learned some words and you're writing an essay that's not on the same topic that those words are about, then you're not going to be able to use those words in your essay. The last thing to remember about vocabulary is actually having knowledge of certain words and being able to use certain words isn't as important as using them in the right place and with other words around them. In English, we call this collocation. Certain words just tend to go together. An example of this might be you could learn the word dramatically, and that's a very good word. It means kind of greatly, and it could also mean related to drama. It's a very good word. It's a very strong IELTS word. But if you say, oh, it rained dramatically last night, because you think, oh, it means a large amount, that doesn't really go together. We don't use dramatically with rain most of the time. We usually use heavily. The word dramatically we usually use for the change in an amount of something. So we can say the economy grew dramatically in the last year. But if you just throw it out there all over the place because you think it means a lot, you're not going to do well. So what this means is you can't just learn words and throw them out there. It's really important to use them appropriately. So what should we be doing instead of looking for band 9 word lists? Well, the first thing you can pay attention to is words in context. So if you just learn words on their own, that's not going to be very useful for you because of words like dramatically that only get used in certain contexts. So you'd be better off studying words as a whole. So you might practice it grew dramatically, it fell dramatically, and all of these little structures, okay? And you can try and find words as chunks rather than words on their own. The next thing to do is to read a lot. And this is going to help you learn what words go together. And you can actually learn a lot just through quite simple reading. So find something you enjoy to read. Find shows you enjoy watching. Listen to some podcasts. Go and check out some of our videos about listening to podcasts on this channel. Do all of these things, especially for IELTS. You probably want to try and get some high quality reading in there as well. So find a good newspaper and read a good newspaper. The other thing to say about this is, especially for IELTS speaking, is that you'll often end up talking about stuff that's relevant to your life. So if you live by the beach, you might want to study some vocabulary about the beach because you will have lots of questions in IELTS speaking where they'll ask you to describe a place you like in your town or something like that. If you're studying sports vocabulary for the IELTS, you're probably better off studying sports vocabulary about whatever your favorite sport is. So if you really like basketball, learn loads of vocabulary about basketball. Don't learn about golf, because in this exam they're mostly going to ask you to describe things you care about. They say, tell me about an activity you enjoy doing on the weekend. So you'd be better off studying stuff that's related to your interests. So Because of that, it's hard to just go and find a word list online and just study that, because it's not going to know what you're interested in. So focus on your interests. So in this video, we've said that learning vocabulary is important, but you should avoid word lists that will promise you a certain IELTS band, because vocabulary is only a little bit of your grade, because those words just might not come up at all, and because knowing a big long list of words isn't as important as using them correctly. And so instead of looking for these band 9 word lists, what you should be doing is focusing your attention on vocabulary for things you're interested in, and looking at phrases instead of individual words, or looking at chunks of language. So you could say it rose dramatically is a good chunk of language, but just learning the word dramatically on its own can get you into lots of trouble if you end up using that inappropriately in your English. I hope that's useful for you. Do hit like, hit subscribe. If you've got any questions, leave a comment down below. We're always really happy to answer questions. We'll try and get back to everyone. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.